it away.
All right. Hey, thanks, Amanda. First, I am not happy. So, so there. So when I teach or when I'm talking to a group, even if I'm doing it via distance, I like to really be able to see people and have interaction. But because of the Zoom microphones and everything else, Amanda just said that she's going to keep you guys with mute. And so I've got a few places where I ask questions and we'll kind of play it by ear and see if she can unmute and then remute everybody or not. But if not, then we'll just plow through and then we'll do all the questions at the end. And hopefully then we can stop sharing my screen and I'll be able to see you guys. And that will make me much happier and more amiable. So to answer your questions. So let's see if we can generate some of those right now. So the topic, leadership in local food systems or local food councils, what does that mean and what might it look like? So as Amanda and I talked about some of the things that this group may be interested in, we sort of came up with a process or an agenda that I'm going to run through. This is way too much. This is 4 hours worth of give and take, discussion and lecture and joint learning. But we're going to whiz through as much as we can in a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then get to some of that discussion. So I want to talk about theory and practice because I like to ground things there. I want to talk about managing versus leading. Is there a difference? Yeah, we'll discuss that. I want to get down to that why, that missional thing that we hopefully is pushing us. I want to talk about why planning matters, and then particularly some strategic planning. How do you start? Real quick way to do an assessment or overview, and then the transitions piece. What I guess are some of the critical pieces that you really need to do in thinking about this. The transitions in leadership can be the piece that either makes it continue, an entity, a business, a farm market, leadership, a food council, or it goes away. So that gets pretty serious. So first, how do you define leadership? Well, if we were all talking with each other, then hopefully you would be giving me some ideas. So just think in your mind for a moment. It's a little funky sometimes. Everybody has a slightly different definition. They're all slightly nuanced. But in my classes, or just in general, I would say leadership, the act of leading a group of people or an organization. Pretty basic, hard to argue with. No big deal. But let's get down and boil it down and get a little more nuanced and a little more specific. So Northouse is one of the authors that I use when I'm teaching. And in his book, he outlines Covey and others. I mean, we've all read a lot of this stuff. You think about creating a vision. So that's more than just leading a group of people. That's getting specific about a clear vision of where we're going, sharing that vision then. And it's mutual. It's not just the leader doing it by his or herself, but sharing it and getting that group buy-in, and then providing the way to realize the vision. So your information, knowledge, methods, how do you process things to make it work? And then you got to manage the conflicting interests. That's another job of both manager and leader, depending on what the organization is. So what does that look like in a food policy council, where a lot of you guys, I think, are residing right now? What are some specific things that you might be able to do? How do you establish credibility to do these things? Because you all know, and I'm sure you've seen it, someone trying to lead or manage without the credibility or without the trust. So we'll talk about a few of these things as we go and move along. So let's jump in. I love this slide. I don't know where I found it. I guess I did give it credit. Good. Thank heaven. You always need to cite your references. So theory and practice, these two kind of key things, I think, come together. And if you can get to the intersection of theory, the theoretical constructs of leadership, and then the practice of actually doing it, for example, in a food system, in a council, or whatever that might be, your nonprofit organization or a university. If you can get to that intersection, that's where the magic happens. So I am attempting, not always good at it. Sometimes I'm better than others, but I'm attempting to stand in the middle of that intersection and direct that traffic and bring those two things together so that we can make things happen. So kind of have that as a mental picture. Plus I'm an old car guy, so I like the picture. Anyway, one of the things that can really drive that is authenticity. As I talk with business leaders around the state and country, as I talk with other community development people, with food systems folks, with USDA folks, one of the things that I hear over and over is authenticity in leadership can be a huge bonus. It's one of the top rated theoretical constructs, if you will, of leadership. There are a whole number of different ideas about leadership, and you've probably heard of participatory and things like that. So authentic is one. So what does it mean to be an authentic leader? I've got an example. Well, first the literature, I'll give you that. So think self-knowledge. You've got to know yourself first. Self-regulation, which some of us do better than others, myself included. Understanding that self-concept. So you're leading from a genuine conviction. You affect followers, and the followers affect the leader. So there's give and take built into this. It's reciprocal, and I really like that idea. And one thing I just heard somebody say last week, leaders don't just develop followers, leaders develop leaders. And so that's part of that reciprocity and moving people forward and developing them. And that gets to the transitions in leadership, which we'll talk about at the end. So you see how it's starting to kind of come together. Then that developmental perspective, it's not a fixed trait. You weren't either born a leader or not a leader. I ask my students this all the time, are you born a leader? Are leaders born or made? Kouzes, Jim Kouzes and Posner, you may have read, if you've read much leadership literature, these guys are kind of gurus. He just spoke at Ohio State a couple years ago. He said, that's the number one question that they're asked, are leaders born or made? And he has kind of a funny answer. He says, well, every leader I've ever met was born. Sorry. But they are made. It's not an inherent trait that you have. So, and there's a lot of research that shows that. So the practical approach, I love these two core questions when you start thinking leadership. What's really going on? How can we get to the bottom of that? And what are we going to do about it? So think about that in your organization, in your nonprofit, in your council, in the work that you're doing. What's going on? We need to really drill down and to ask those questions, to take the lead in doing that, and then create that vision, share that vision, and make a way to do something about it. That's that authenticity can come through, and it's very effective. Some criticisms, I always like to throw those out there. It's unclear if this authentic leadership really results in positive outcomes. Well, okay, try it for yourself. That's my answer to the critics on that. There aren't a lot of, there's not a lot of literature on criticism of authenticity. How hard to, not bomb-proof, but it's pretty clear stuff. So, can you think of an example of an authentic leader today? Somebody today. Your mind's there. I've got one. So this guy, Pat, he spoke to our food system. This was 2014, I guess. Excuse me, our critical, we explored civility and discourse racism in the food system. This was up in Cleveland. It was a remarkable conference. And we went to Great Lakes Brewery, and he spoke with us for about an hour. He's one of the co-founders. They are doing community redevelopment work, sustainability work. They are very transparent in their organization of what they're trying to do. It's not just brewing a great beer. But Pat is asking us questions. What's really going on in this neighborhood, in this community? What can we do about it? How can we help? He and his brother grew up in Cleveland, and they saw the decline of the steel industry. They saw the job loss. They saw their parents put out of work, or their grandparents, retirements going down. And they said, what can we do? So that was an authentic question that led them, and they like beer, an authentic question that led them on this path. It's a really neat model, something really to look at. Okay, transformational leadership. What do you think of when you think of transformational leadership? What does it mean? Well, again, let's quick look at the literature. The transformational leader works with people. She or he acts as a role model, kind of an inspirer, challenges folks to take ownership, and then understands strengths and weaknesses, looks at that team and figures out how to align those tasks to best utilize the folks to get the mission done, to accomplish that why, if you will. If you've read Simon Sinek or watched his 17-minute TED Talk on Start With Why, if you haven't, that's a homework assignment. I assign that to groups all the time. You've got to watch it. It's really powerful, and it really makes you think missionally about what you're doing personally and what your organization is doing. So Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, Start With Why. Google it, watch it. Okay, transformational leader. Can you think of one? I've got an example, of course. And if you're on some of the definitions and everything else. You don't have to furiously take notes because I'm talking about 300 miles an hour. Amanda has slides. She will send those out. And so maybe the photos aren't all in, but the literature, the background, the references, those are all there, and the definitions. So you'll be able to have those. So transformational literature, or was it? Yeah, transformational. So here's a picture. This is a Miami County, Ohio, down by Troy, just north of Dayton, about 30 miles. We decided, our food council got started. It was kind of nascent, a lot of talk, and so we had this idea, let's do the farm dinner. And so we found a farm at Staley Mill. They, what do they brew there? They've got like a bourbon or a whiskey distillery. It's not my thing, but it's pretty neat. They're using 200-year-old technology. So anyway, they opened their doors and said, come on out. We'll get the table and the straw bales. So the person on the food council was just a local citizen. She said, I want to see this happen. She undertook the hardest job of all, which the little inset picture there is a picture of 2 or 3 of the 5 chefs that we brought together to serve the locally sourced foods, meats, proteins, vegetables, and everything. Now, if you've ever met a chef, a lot of them are pretty independent. And so telling them, well, here's the list of ingredients we have, and here's how we want you to fix it. She was able to work with that group and to make it all come together. It was a remarkable thing to watch her in action. And again, just a citizen. She made a difference in that community. They have continued this dinner now for, I think this is at the 4th year coming up. Every year it makes a little bit of money. That goes back to support the Food Council, which supports other activities like a food summit and things like that. Amazing stuff, amazing group of people who put their mind to it. So that's just an example of doing something that's transformational, taking that extra step. So let's shift gears. Management and leadership. Is there a difference? What's the difference? This is a question I ask all the time when I'm teaching or working with classes. So in management, we usually think about processes, that keep a complicated system of people together. We're going to keep them moving forward. We're going to manage the process. In leadership, you're thinking more about the processes that create organizations or adapts them to changing circumstances. So you're leading through, it's a different path. It's not just figuring out and managing that. So how do you align those things, and what do you do? Here a little, some specific bullet points. Management, you're looking at the resources, you're using information, data, organizing plans, things like that. Leadership, you're thinking about the people. What is it? The old thing, you manage things and lead people. Yeah, you do, but you also manage people, don't you? Yeah, and that's okay. So anyway, let's not get into the semantics, but it does focus more on the people when you're thinking about leadership. You're focusing on influencing others and eliciting decisions, decisive action, and commitment from others, establishing that direction versus just using a plan, inspiring the other people. So an example that I've given is budgeting. Think about a manager might focus on maintaining production, at the historic budget levels. Decisions will reflect that. We want to get the job done. We want to keep our budgets. The leader might say, what's a different way to shift those resources, shift those budgets, and accomplish the production in a different way or in a better way that could be more profitable. Another example on staffing. A manager, somebody would quit. We need to replace that person. The leader says, hang on, let's involve a few people. Let's put a team together and let's ask, do we need to replace that person? Or is there something different that we might do that would actually help us advance better and more quickly? So just some couple of ideas and variations on that. So I mentioned the why. Simon Sinek start with why. I ask this question to a lot of people because I ask it of myself pretty regularly. Actually, most mornings when I get out of bed, why am I getting out of bed? What do I want to accomplish today? Why do I want to accomplish that? Well, I'm an educator. I want to help. That's my mission is to try to make the world a better place, to encourage people. So that drives me. It drives my what. And so one of the things I challenge people with a lot is to think back about their mission, which is really the core why. I hope if each of you are on a food council, that you've got a very specific mission that's very direct, that tells why your food council is doing what it's doing. If you don't, and go back and think about it. I actually have some tools I can help you work through that process that could be hopefully very beneficial to you. So let's talk about that real quickly. Why local food? Why do you establish a food council? Does it matter? What do you think? Here are some responses that we've gathered over the years. Well, we want to improve the economy. We want tastier food. We want to build our community up, strengthen our face-to-face relationships. I want to know the person that I buy my eggs from. I want to lower my chemical exposure. There are people fighting diseases and things that are absolutely trying to stay away from any and all pesticides or whatever. Reducing supply risk. Think about the truckload of tomatoes, with 80,000 pounds traveling 3,000 miles from California versus 80 1,000 pound truckloads driving all around southern Ohio, where I grew up. Which is better? Which takes less fuel? Well, nobody really knows the answer to that question. You can do math and you can argue both ways, but absolutely the supply chain, if there's a hiccup or a disruption, the local food is already there. It doesn't have to travel. It's a huge difference. So anyway, I can go on about that forever. Why council? Why policy change? Can you make a difference? Can you encourage change in your customers? Of course. And that's why we're doing this kind of work. So in thinking about the councils, and again, as Amanda and I talked about this seminar, what might we try to share specifically to food councils? I'm kind of giving you some general ideas on some leadership and management things. So let's talk. Let me check my time. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the food councils and how we bring people together. One of the things that we did when we started getting a lot of requests from communities to help them build a food council or establish a local food council. And so we started making lists. Who are the folks that we want to invite? And basically it's everybody. But there are some really specific folks that you want to try to get in there that don't always show up to the meeting. And so that's the reason we started making some lists and really trying to target some people because they can be great contributors to a council, particularly when it's getting going. That includes some of those food processors and distributors. Those guys are really busy, so they're not always going to show up. Maybe it's the food entrepreneurs who are starting their new food businesses that are there. But how about the bigger guys? They have a role too. So the local government, economic development people, they can be, sometimes some of them are really great at seeing the opportunity for the small business, small processors, food entrepreneurs. Other times they're thinking, local food, maybe we can get another giant canning factory. Well, either one, but you want them at the table. They also can access some dollars sometimes, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, get pretty specific. And if you don't have all those people coming, and I know the food councils that I've helped get started, they dwindle down. It's a natural thing. So you want to re-invite. So what are some of the actions at a food council? Developing food plans. That's the next step for a couple of councils that I've been working with lately. They're interested in saying, can we do a food plan? Can we talk about agriculture and economic development decisions? A lot of times you drive down the highway and you see the sign, available industrial space. And what is it? It's already an industrial space. It's corn. It's growing corn. It's being used for commerce, but they don't always think that way. So how do we, include them in these thoughts and decisions? Establishing priorities, et cetera, et cetera. The economic factor is a great way to bring people in because they start to think of it in a different way. Food as economy, food making a difference in the local economy. It can be a hook, if you will, to get more people involved as you're doing this kind of work. Some food councils, this is in Columbus, I think, and Wyland Park, if I'm not mistaken, where my good friend Susan Colbert is working, doing a lot of stuff with the local community, with food councils, with food entrepreneurs. And this is just a community garden, not just, it's a fantastic community garden. I think somebody's keeping bees at this location, hosting food summits. I think this one, I don't remember where this is. This might be Miami County Food Summit a couple years ago with a keynote speaker. That might be Brian Williams at Morpsey. He's big on food economy and has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. People out there, you bring people together, you get them juiced up, and then you go do things. Don't let them leave if you have a food summit without some actionable items, and you can move them toward that. I'm working right now with Dayton and Montgomery County. We're talking about that very thing. How do we capture that energy, keep people moving, and keep building our economy? Here's just an example of some activities that, since I was extension educator in Miami County, and so I have some specifics. They did a food summit, 82 participants. They're planning in 2018. I think it's already on the books, or may have just happened. I was traveling and I couldn't be there anyway. Their virtual farmers market, they got a grant from USDA, and over 45,000. That was earlier this year. I'm sure it's well above that now. And people put their orders online. They pick it up on Tuesday or whatever day that is. It's fabulous. They don't have to stand in line. Maybe they don't have Saturday morning to go to the farmers market. What we've found is the virtual markets aren't competing with the farmers markets. It's a different set of clientele who have different time constraints and needs to order the food virtually. It's neat stuff. The local board dinner, I showed you the picture of that. That has grown. It's doubled in size. Very popular. Food policy, looking at changing some of those rules for food trucks or for backyard chickens. Kitchen startup, a shared use. They're looking at that, investigating that, and then doing education. So amazing stuff that can be done. This is repeated across the country. I just had this as an example because I know those guys. This is from Brian. I love this guy. He says, this is boil it down. How do we get food from here, from the farm to the store? What hurdles are in the way? Those are the key questions that he asks to help people and councils think through this sort of thing. It's really good stuff. One of the number one things that answers that question is planning. We've got to do some planning to bring people together so that we can create these processes that will make it work. So when planning, question is, how do you know what to do? How do you know what to do about anything? We live in a society and building community requires some action, but how do you know what to do? How do you take that action? Well, it's observation, it's sensing, contextualizing, assessing, asking, talking with real people, doing explicit assessments to see what's going on in your specific community and how can you address this need or that need, whatever it may be. It may be food insecurity, it may be food accessibility, food affordability, all of these different things, but what are they? And so doing those assessments. So let's talk about that. Well, just quick, first an example. This is up at Flint. We were up in Michigan last year. And I asked, how did they decide to do this? Who came together? And it was people just like you guys and said, hey, let's take over this. The farmer's market in the background used to be the newspaper. And now it's amazing inside space. They do education. There's all kinds of stuff in there. But how did they decide that? Well, they planned. They undertook a strategic plan process to plan for the future. How about I went down to Vanderbilt to visit their hospital farmers market. It's about 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I went down there and talked with them, and they're one of the early hospitals west or east of the Mississippi. Kaiser Permanente's been doing it out west for a while, but they're one of the first hospitals to put a farmers market right at the medical center. And guess what? People from the community, not just patients and doctors and nurses, certainly they're down there, but the community is coming. But how did they decide to do that? How did they determine that it would be successful? It was needed. Again, it was a planning process, and it was thinking strategy. That's what leaders do. That's what food councils can help do. So you guys, just a couple of examples to throw out there. So, there's my heirloom tomatoes. That's from last year. They're on the vine right now, so I'm getting happy as they start to ripen up this week. Anyway, sorry, just an aside. So long range planning. How do you do that? What are some of the steps that you need to do? Let's talk about that for a minute. In general, you kind of start with an assessment. What's going on? What's the current situation? Think back to the earlier slide on leadership. What's going on? What are we going to do about it? So look at the skills, talents, abilities of people that are on your board. Look at the resources that are there. Look at the volunteers, the folks that you don't always necessarily think of. And then start thinking through, how can I involve those guys to make this happen? So again, current situation, future situation. In fact, that's a facilitator's process that I've used. What's our current state? What's our future state? And how do we move from A to B? So you do that comparison. You chart it all down, and you get people thinking, you get people talking, and you can really make some progress. Key principles in doing an assessment: stakeholders, they're the experts. It's not somebody from the outside. It's not the leader necessarily, or the extension office. We might help, we might facilitate, but it's the folks who are in the organizations that comprise. All the stakeholders have talents, abilities. Holy cow! And we forget that sometimes when we're looking at a board of volunteers or a group of citizens who have come together. I tell you, they've got some rich stuff. Extension needs to remember that more. In fact, we're getting much better at paying attention to the talent, to the knowledge of our folks in communities. And then we bring some additional stuff from Ohio State, some research, it's fine. But when you put those two things together, it becomes really strong. So that assessment kind of starts in that process and in that mindset. The purpose, you start mobilizing action, identifying and matching the skills. You can also create action plans, and that's, I'll talk about here in just a second, some strategic action work. I've done a lot of that with groups all over the state, nonprofits, for-profits, departments at Ohio State. It's one of the most critical things that you can do as a leader in an organization. And if you're not the leader, you can suggest it. Officially the leader. Everybody has leadership roles or opportunities. So why does planning matter? I throw these questions out all the time. If you don't plan, will you face uncertainty? Will you die? Will the organization die? If it doesn't plan, will your clientele go away? What would you rather do? Plan or die? Sorry. But it's true. How many organizations have we seen that have folded and have closed up because they didn't have a specific plan that was going to get them over that hurdle that came along? And I'll talk about that in a minute with the transitioning piece. We'll talk about leadership, the good, the bad, and the ugly of how you transition leadership. Because when you hit those transition moments or those roadblocks or the unexpected things, if you've got the plan, then you can go right back to it, even in the crisis. And you can overcome it and you can survive. Then you can do the remediation and get going again. I used to be in the fire service. We did hazmat planning, full level 3. I was in private industry. It's kind of the chemical industry. And so we did training, hours, hundreds of hours of training. And I was a first responder. Well, it's all great when you're training, but when you get an actual call and there's a chlorine dioxide leak and you're suiting up and going in, you don't have time to think about what you might do. You've got to go back to your plan, and then it's clockwork, and it's not a problem because you know what to do. So it's not different, believe it or not. I know it sounds like an extreme example, but it's not. It's the same thing with organizations, with food councils, with local farmers market groups when those boards have those problems. And we've seen them. You guys have seen them too. So the why, getting back to that mission, to drive that internal purpose, your primary objectives, thinking through why you're doing what you're doing. It's a critical piece. Go back and review your mission. Maybe you've done it recently. Maybe you haven't really explicitly written it down. If so, you need to do that. I love these examples. I'll ask groups a lot of times, tell me what your mission is. And so for you folks on the call, in your head right now, can you tell me what your mission is? Probably, sort of, maybe explicitly, maybe not. You look at Kiva, that's the lending, international lending, really cool organization to connect people through lending. That's what they're doing. Why? To alleviate poverty, period. That's pretty straightforward. That is pretty good stuff. A buddy of mine, he's retired now. He was doing his dissertation research, and he interviewed folks at the Hunger Project. They're not on there. And he was in their offices, and while he was waiting to talk to the CEO, he's talking to the young woman who was sitting at the desk who had greeted him and said, have a seat, please. And so he just said, I'll kick up a conversation. He said, so tell me, what do you do with the Hunger Project? And she said, well, I'm working to end world hunger. And Chet Bowling, he was like, huh? I thought she was going to say, I answer the phone, I send emails, I send correspondence, I greet people. And she does all those things. But she realized the missional statement of the Hunger Project was to end world hunger. And she knew that all those things that she was doing were contributing to that process. So anyway, so get back to that key mission. What's your why? What drives you to get out of bed in the morning? When you think about complex change, I mentioned this earlier, the two futures, where are we now? What do we want to do? Certainly, while the two futures thing is, there's one coming. There's going to be tomorrow. The question is, can it be the tomorrow that we desire, that we envision, that we want? And it can be if we take the time to plan. So how do you plan well? Just 3 quick steps. This is like 101. You can't even do it. Oh, you can't. No, anybody can do it, but you just need to go into more depth. I'm going to give it to you in 2 minutes. So it's insane. But you can call me and get the notes, and we can talk. So you create that future focus, the key theme, the alignment, gather ideas. So real quickly, what does that mean? You bring your group together. You bring outside consultants or partners, and you ask some questions. What are the shared values? What's the key stuff that we really believe in, we really stand for? What are the top couple issues that we're facing? How would we like this to look in 5 years? That visioning piece, that future piece, and what are a couple of large goals? So that's the first, kind of first blush at what you're thinking about. And then a rapid SWOT. Some people make, the SWOT, we've done 100 SWOT analysis. Well, how about do one that then you use the data? Don't just put it on a shelf, because they're still valid and they still give you really good data. And if you do it, I call it a rapid SWOT, because nobody has time really to invest as much as I would like in planning, half a day, 2 days. We do it quickly. You can still get the same effect. You ask them, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And what are the threats? You chart all that out, and then you can go through and look for the key themes. And then you can really easily start to see some strategies and some action items that you can write down and then go do. I have that on there. Identify the key themes. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? What are some action items that we might put under those key themes? So that's the third step. Use some action planning worksheets. What specific things could we undertake in the next 30 to 90 days? Let's get real. It's not something we're going to put on the shelf. This is a strategic plan that we're going to never look at again. This is an active living document, iterative. It's a learning document. And if you do it well, then it can be that way, and you report back on it every month. And you have an explicit list. Here's an example of the action planning workshop. What's the target date, the completion date, who is on the task force, what specific steps. And then you bring that in every month. And you don't have the meeting at your board meeting. You have a 30-second report on what your small group has done in order to get those chefs together to host the new locavore dinner this year. You don't sit there and talk about it all, and take that 30 minutes out of your meeting, because then you're killing your people and your meeting's been protracted. Now it's 3 hours long instead of 90 minutes. So anyway, tools, processes, ways that you can do this stuff. It really does work, but you got to do it. You got to manage it. You got to lead. Another more detailed action planning worksheet, just asking some of those questions so that you can write it down on paper, have something to follow. How are we doing on time? Oh, we must be doing well, because there's the summary. So strategic planning, taking some simple steps can really help you figure out what you want to do, develop those explicit action steps, the detail, set up the people who is responsible, and then that timeline. It can really work. Transitions, let's talk about that really quickly and we'll wrap. I want your questions. I want to talk. So why do they matter? Are they critical? What do you have to do to be successful in a transition? So just a couple, like 3 steps. One, it's like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So celebrate the good. So the former gal or guy who's been there for 20 years or 2 months, they're leaving. Okay, that's good. Thank you for your service. Okay. Look at what they did that was good. The new person coming in should not just throw everything out. In fact, that's a big mistake that we've seen people make. I've seen it when I was in private industry. I've seen it since the last 20 years at the university. But acknowledge that, look and see what's good, see what's should be continued. But you also acknowledge the bad, thorns, fears, mistakes, shortcomings. And here's an opportunity to have a conversation with the outgoing leader and the incoming leader. And again, you guys can look at this. There's some really good questions that can be asked on this. And so I would encourage you to take the notes and take a look. I really like what Edmund says here. And this came out of a Forbes article just recently, and really caught my attention. I tend to read a lot. That's another thing. If you're in a leadership position, read. I'm trying to learn. Dear heaven, there's so much to keep up with or to learn, so that I can improve processes for myself or the folks I'm trying to help. I hope you guys are doing the same. So anyway, incoming, outcoming, a few things you can do. Prepare for the ugly. The transition doesn't just happen on July 1st when the other person leaves and the new person starts. It's a process, and so there's a lot of work that can be done that you need to keep in mind and make that transition. And I mentioned this earlier, lean on your strategic plan. It's your roadmap. And so if it's not good, then do an iterative process of it. You can do a short update of it. You don't have to do the full-blown planning process. Or if it's been a couple of years, maybe go back and do a half-day retreat or a day retreat and do the full-blown planning process. But it will give you your next steps. It's an automatic. And if there's good stuff in there, don't let that just sit on the shelf and not be used. Network, crowdsource, you guys know all this stuff. So key takeaways today. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. Although I can't see you, drive me nuts. Think about your personal approach. Think about that theory and practice, how those things come together, how you can get to that intersection and make things happen. Remember management versus leading. Think about the why. Homework, Simon Sinek, start with why. Google it up. It's 17 minutes or better. Read the book. It's really good. The strategic planning, then the transitioning. So that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. We'll get Amanda to open up the microphones and throw some questions if you have, or comments, some ideas that you might have about what I've thrown out there.
So I will go ahead and unmute folks, Brian. Some of them are using an older version of Zoom, so I won't be able to unmute them. So they'll have to still use the chat box.
That was like rapid fire, crazy. Holy cow, 40 minutes. Any thoughts on some of this, or examples that you guys might have of work you're doing?
I think I've given everyone access to talk now.
Of course, if you guys were graduate students, you would be talking. Because you know I'm going to give you a grade.
I have unmuted everybody, and so you should be able to talk if you choose to. You can also still use the Q&A box if that's a better fit.
Or host Amanda, if you have a question or a comment, feel free.
I do not have one quite yet. Seems like most people are unmuted, so we've got some success with that.
Well, I appreciate the time, and I hope there's good stuff in there. By all means, Amanda knows how to get a hold of me. Send me a note. If you have questions to follow up, and I'll be glad to help if I can.
It looks like we might have one person who is going to talk.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
Maybe not. So as normal, this virtual convening was recorded, and so it will be archived soon, sent out through the listserv, and also placed on the Ohio Food Policy Network website.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so I'm actually driving right now. Don't worry, I'm being safe about it, but I did have a question. My name is Brandy Phipps, and I am the chairperson of our very new Clark County Local Food Council.
Oh, yeah.
So working with Pam Bennett, who's our vice chairperson now, and Eric Roberts. has been involved in this. He's an OSU, or was an OSU grad student, just graduated.
Yep.
And so I have a question, and kind of the biggest thing that I've noticed, and we're really new right now, so there's a lot to learn and still be done, although I think Eric and Pam have guided us really well over the past few years as we've developed this inaugural team. How do you have any suggestions for within our smaller committees, how to go from lots and lots of ideas, especially when we're dealing with really cerebral people, to solid tasks that are getting done?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Brandy. Thank you. So prioritization builds or increases capacity. So
Okay.
the more that you prioritize, the more time you have. It's a literal cause effect. And so you think about this, when you have priority action items that everybody has agreed to, you can say no to the other 3 things that have come across your desk that morning, and you can get back and get the task done. So what I suggest to groups is that they take their strategic plan, they look at their action steps, and they specifically prioritize those with a ranking. You can use dots if you want to do it in a group process, or you can vote electronically. You can do however you want. But you have that conversation and you say, what are the most important things? Is it the locavore dinner, or is it finding a shared use kitchen?
Okay.
If everybody says it's both, then okay, the person who wants to lead the one and lead the other, they're now tasked with the responsibility of making them both happen. If you have limited resources, then of course, then you really have to get busy with the priorities and say,
Okay.
this, not that. And the other thing that I'll just throw real quickly is remember that your task forces, your small committees are not just the people in that room. I work with groups across the state, very small boards, child care boards that are doing great things to help community child care. And they got done with their strategic plan. They looked at all the action items. They're like, holy cow, we can't do all this. We're only 8 people. I'm like, no, you don't have to. What you have to do is prioritize a couple of the items and then call your friends and say, hey, we just finished the strategic planning process. Here's one thing that we're going to do. And you ask people to help for just the one item. And you can build a team of non-board members who can get really excited and can bring some energy and do this one thing. And then they might later become a board member if they get really excited about it. But it's temporal. And so you're not asking them for that 1 year or whatever else. So you've got to break it down into those pieces. Fantastic question.
Yeah, and we worked, Melanie Wilt, who's also on our council, and she's one of our county commissioners, did a really great strategic planning session. And we do have a really great strategic plan and some action steps. So I think that we're on the right track. It's just a matter of, again, often on the committees, there's a lot of cerebral people. And so kind of translating that into actual action has been a little bit difficult as we've gotten started. But I think you've given me some good stuff to take with me and utilize in encouraging all of those people.
Well, and I push those guys. I'll ask them questions. I work with other departments at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
I work with 2 or 3 engineering departments. And so between 25 and 46, 48 tenured faculty members sitting there and doing strategic planning work.
Right.
And he's saying, well, wait a second. Now, why are you doing that? Why did you say that? You've got to drill down. Tell me why this matters so much. And then, so tell me then what you're going to do about it.
Okay.
Challenge them a little bit and push them, because then it engages their mental brain and how they have to take that. And the chairs of the departments that I work with have been pretty pleased with the outcomes of those. Some of them have been full day-long retreats.
Wonderful. No, that sounds great. Thank you very much. Because I was driving while I was listening to the webinar, I, for safety reasons, obviously, did not get a chance to look over the slides really well. I heard that those are going to be archived. Is there a way that will we have access to the slides at that point as well? Or is there a way that we could maybe get those slides besides in the recording? Is that possible?
Amanda?
Yeah, I can send them out. Are you on the Ohio Food Policy Network listserv?
I'm not sure. I think Eric sent a forward of the webinar and I registered directly for the webinar, but I do not think I'm actually part of the listserv, but I would like to be.
Okay, if you, we can connect and I can make sure that I get you on the listserv.
Okay.
We can take care of that.
Okay. Would you like me to take your email address now, or do you have it through the registration for the webinar?
I will have your information to the registration.
Okay, wonderful. I think that was my only real question, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness. Those are good tips.
Anybody else have any other questions for Brian? Going once, going twice.
Well, thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate the time, and have a great growing season.
Thanks again, Brian. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.